Is 6 months, if you can believe it, 6 months to the day that we have the war in Ukraine. And there's a lot to unpack. I want to bring in former UN Weapons Inspector, U.S. Marine Scott Ritter, to provide some excellent analysis on what we've been dealing with. He has been a voice of reason and sort of calm throughout all of this. So, Scott, welcome back to the show, my friend. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So there's a couple of big pieces geopolitically that I want to talk about before we talk about some of the military strategy with you on the show tonight. But first, just this afternoon, some breaking news. Boris Johnson, the lame duck prime minister of the UK, showed up to give a speech in Kiev to provide his support once again. Says that all of Britain is united and it's Putin's war. That's why gas prices and everything else are so high in the UK. So first on that piece, I just wanted to get your perspective.
I think it's to bolster morale. Reality is a hard thing. And right now, the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people are confronted with the harsh reality that they're losing this war. And furthermore, there isn't anything on the horizon that is going to meaningfully alter that outcome. I don't think the British believe that Ukraine is suddenly going to win the war, but what they need is the Ukrainians to continue to fight. The longer they can stretch out this conflict on the ground, the better opportunity, or an opportunity might arise that can alter the current algorithm that Russia's running that has them winning no matter what. The goal, I think, right now of the Ukrainians, of the British, the Americans, and others is to try and create distractions for Russia that will cause Russia to lose sight of its ultimate objective and maybe carry out a diversion of resources that creates a new political reality. Having Boris Johnson arrive, first of all, understand this is no little thing. This is a big deal. So why is Johnson there? If everything was fine, Johnson would not be arriving. Johnson would stay back and would let normal diplomatic, protocol and diplomatic interaction work. But Johnson's arrival means that it is a desperate situation in Ukraine. This is a desperate act by a desperate lame duck prime minister to be seen as propping up a desperate Ukrainian government that is facing desperation on the battlefield.
CNN, well, you wouldn't know that by watching some of the propaganda that you see from CNN. So CNN is there. They're live to this afternoon in Kiev. This is a report. I just want to play this for you, Scott, because there's a number of pieces of propaganda in this CNN report. So it doesn't look pretty desperate when you watch this CNN report. Watch.
People here, we're right in the center of Kyiv, the heart, the symbolic heart of the capital. And it's quite extraordinary. The Ukrainian officials have laid out this long line of Russian tanks and armored vehicles and artillery pieces. They said that this war, the Russians expected to have a military parade here when they took over. They said, this is the parade they're getting. If you look behind me here, there's a burnt out tank. It speaks to the intense fighting around the capital months ago. Now, Ukraine pushed back that advance, but still there is intense fighting, a stagnant front line for many weeks now, Max, on the east, the south, and even the northeast of this country. Just this week, a Ukrainian official saying at least 9,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in this conflict. The toll on civilians, on the military, has been very heavy for this war of choice that Russia made. As you said, President Volodymyr Zelensky released a speech a short time ago commemorating this Independence Day and 6 months since the war started.
So we reported just last week that Kiev was sort of beefed up for conflict that never came to the borders of the city, right? And so that's why the media is telling us, look, they're back. They returned to bar life.
They pushed them away.
Right?
They pushed them away.
They succeeded. So if I were a reporter, which I am, but if I were for CNN, I might say, well, can you show me some sort of, I don't know, paraphernalia of where the battle was instead of this street that just looks like a parade that there has been no conflict in recent times? This is just staged. Even any any idiot can see that, right?
Look, this is the war in Ukraine is a huge war. I mean, the geographical expanse of Ukraine uh, is massive. It's like fighting a war in England. Going from London across the Channel to Berlin. These are major frontages. And in the early stages of the conflict, there is no doubt that the Russians suffered some casualties, some setbacks. Normally, when you suffer a setback on the battlefield, that means that you abandon some equipment, dead bodies, as you retreat. And the Ukrainians, of course, captured these, and that's what we're seeing. But the Ukrainians right now are trying to project short-term battlefield victories that occurred in February and March and make people believe that a similar thing is taking place today when it's the furthest thing from the truth. The CNN reporter spoke of a stagnant battlefield. There's nothing stagnant about what's happening on the battlefield today. The Russians are in the business of killing Ukrainians. The 9,000 dead figure from Zelensky is a joke. It's not a serious figure. There were documents leaked earlier from the Department of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, dated April 22nd, that speaks of 191,000 casualties, of whom around 80,000 are dead. That's April 22nd. The bloodiest period of time for the Ukrainians has transpired since then. In May, June, July, right now, where the kill ratios are 10, 20, 30 to 1 in favor of Russia.
Wow.
The Ukrainians have suffered horrific losses. And if CNN would go to the front line, they can't. Why? They'll die, because that's what's happening to Ukrainian soldiers right now. They're dying. The Russians are breaking the back Ukrainian defensive lines. These defensive lines that the Ukrainians had 8 years to prepare, the Russians are rolling them up. And when they finish, they've unlocked the key to the Ukrainian defenses. I think we're going to see the hammer come down, and the Russians start to carry out, what I'll call breakout operations, not your classic deep penetration operations, because again, the Russians are casualty averse. They have a formula right now that's in play in the East that's working to their unilateral advantage. And I don't think they want to change that formula and create an equal playing space for the Ukrainians. So we'll continue to see a deliberate advance as the Russians control every aspect of the battle. But it's going to be at a quicker pace than what we've seen, because the defenses will no longer be there. The Ukrainians won't be dug in. They'll just be dying in the open.
Yeah, some of the reports I've seen over the past 24 hours have reports of Ukrainian soldiers saying they spend up to 90% of their time hidden in trenches. Russia launching a major offensive towards Kherson. And now this afternoon, the United States, just moments ago before we came on the air, and we recorded it and we wanted to play it for you. This is the Pentagon making a new announcement of they say I love how they say this, 2.9 billion. They won't say 3 billion. They'll say 2.9 billion. And they're happy to say it's the largest package we've ever done individually to Ukraine. I'm going to play this, and I want Scott to make sense of what they're even talking about here. Listen.
In the medium to long term, and they include 6 additional National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, or NASAMS, with additional munitions for those NASAMS, up to 245,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, which is the ammunition used for the NATO standard artillery systems that have been transferred to Ukraine, up to 65,000 rounds of 120 millimeter mortar ammunition, up to 24 counter-artillery radars. We're also including in this package Puma unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, and support equipment for Scan Eagle UAS systems. We're including Vampire counter-unmanned aerial systems, laser-guided rocket systems, and a substantial funding package for training, maintenance, and sustainment so that Ukraine can keep the equipment they already have in the fight. Deliveries of this USAI package will begin in the next several months and continue over the coming years. While many of these capabilities are not intended to directly contribute to today's fight, they will form the backbone of a robust future Ukrainian force.
Can you? Okay, so that's
quite the goodie bag.
right, but it's not for now. It's like, hey, if you work really hard and you get straight A's, you're going to get all of this stuff over the next few years. So, Scott, we don't need to go through all of the technical specifications, but maybe you can sort of boil it down for us. This is like a care package that's going to last for years in Ukraine.
Well, actually, what I heard is a care package that won't begin to be delivered for many months and won't be completely delivered for years. And so
Right.
it's going to take many years before the Ukrainians get the culminating impact of all of the weapons that were described. What's missing from this, to give you an example, 240,000 155 millimeter rounds. Sounds impressive, but the Russians are firing 60,000 rounds a day. So 6, 12, 18, 24, Marine math, 4 days. I mean, it'll last a little bit longer, but it's not a lot of ammunition when you're talking about the kind of sustained rates of fire that exist on the modern battlefield. And that assumes that all 240,000 rounds make it to the front lines. We know, or at least we suspect, CBS was going to put out a documentary that talked about this, but they pulled it. But, up to 70% of these munitions won't make it to the front lines. They'll be blown up, interdicted, etc. So, it's not real numbers that they're putting out here. Even if all 240,000 rounds were delivered today, that the reality is, maybe 50,000 would make it to the front lines, and those 50,000 might be expended, might not be expended, but that's 50,000 rounds. The Russians are firing 60,000 per day. Let's say you fire 5,000 rounds a day. That gives you 10 days worth of ammunition. Then you're out. You're out of ammunition. And this is a package that's supposed to run years, and they're going to be out of ammunition in 10 days. And every aspect about this is the same thing. This is a political action. This is not designed to change the outcome on the battlefield. And I can guarantee you the American generals in the know recognize that the war will be over before the bulk of this material ever is in a position to be sent to Ukraine, let alone received and used by Ukraine. Ukraine won't see the vast majority of this equipment. They won't get to use the vast majority of this equipment. And anything that gets delivered will either be destroyed or captured by the Russians. So thank you. I mean, I'm sure the Russians right now are writing thank you notes to Joe Biden and the Pentagon for providing them with billions of dollars of high-tech American equipment that they can use to train on or equip militia forces, or maybe equip anti-American forces overseas, give them American weapons to fight the American troops or American proxies. Whatever it is, this is not going to change the outcome on the battlefield. This is literally a waste of taxpayer money. The American people should be outraged about what's happening.
Well, but if we were swallowing the media narrative, it is that Ukraine is succeeding, right? And now Washington is sort of giving Ukraine the blessing to go after recapturing Crimea. And so we're not supposed to think that. We're supposed to think casualties are low, success is high, we got to keep going. And also they will take Crimea back. And none of that seems to be true.
Yeah, that Crimea piece, I want to really focus on that here, which is that Zelensky says we are going to take Crimea back. He said this over the past 24 hours by any means necessary. Any means necessary. And to Natalie's point, this is like a blessing, a weapons blessing, that go ahead. Because he says by any means necessary. Well, it's what means did they have left, if not then for the international NATO community, which is going to be providing this assistance to help them make
Well, the
this
people
happen.
of Crimea voted in 2014 to join Russia. That was their will as well as Russia's will, right? And so they're saying they want to take it back. Although the history is also, it's a storied history, of course, and there is divisive loyalty in the people who live there. But to think that Ukraine is not only going to recapture the Donbass and then keep going and take back more than what they started from is really science fiction.
Yeah, Scott, what's your thought on this?
My wife gave me the green light to climb Mount Everest. She's not going to provide the $60,000. She knows that my knees are bad, that my back's bad, that I don't do well at altitude. But she gave me permission to climb Mount Everest. I'm going to climb Mount Everest with as much certainty as Ukraine's going to retake Crimea, meaning it will never happen. The international community, primarily in the West, has long said that they do not recognize Russia's acquisition of Crimea, nor will they recognize Russia's acquisition of the Donbass or Russia's acquisition of what will be called Novaya Russia, the ethnic Russian majority portions of Ukraine that Russia has indicated are going to belong to Russia once this fight's over. But the reality is Russia's going to own Ukraine, Crimea, own the Donbass, own Novaya Russia, and there's nothing anybody can do to change that. Zelensky lives in a fantasy world. He's speaking political talk, but hot air does not beat cold steel. I'll make the following wager against anybody, that Zelensky will be removed from office, either fleeing alive or killed, long before any Ukrainian troops ever set foot in Crimea or Donbass or anything. Ukraine is losing this war. What Zelensky's talking about is total victory on the side of Ukraine. Total victory. That means that Ukraine has somehow flipped the narrative, flipped the script, and they found a way to defeat Russia strategically, tactically, operationally. It just isn't in the cards. It isn't going to happen.
Without the manpower or the firepower, they just don't have it, right? No matter what the West can sort of wave around saying we're sending it, they just don't have it.
Well, I think we need to understand, not only does Ukraine no longer have it, the West doesn't have it to give. I mean, what the United States is providing here, again, I'm not going to parse it out. It's nothing. The Russians would call it myelich, change. It's literally nothing. You need tanks. You need the artillery pieces. You need the HIMARS systems. You need aircraft. And then you need the manpower to use this, trained manpower. Ukraine doesn't have this. And so, again, hot air is fine. Anybody can talk big, make PowerPoint slides, etc. But turning theory into reality requires men, blood, steel. And the Ukrainians simply don't have it. You know who does have it? Russia. Russia's been planning for this war. And this is something a lot of people need to think about. When this war started, this special military operation, many Western analysts were saying that Russia was going for the quick kill. Quick kill. And when it didn't happen, the Russians were flustered, didn't know what to do. Oh my gosh, we didn't do the quick kill. Now we're going to slogging match. We're exhausted, etc. None of that's true. Russia's using 60,000 rounds of ammunition a day. That means that Russia, at some point in time, many years back, had to start allocating the resources to procure this ammunition and set it aside to make sure that there was sufficient resources to carry out this action. Russia's not stalled. Russia's not halted. Logistically, Russia's running on all cylinders, which means this war was planned years ago to be waged exactly the way it's being waged right now. Let that sink in. Russia's doing exactly what it always planned on doing. It's the Ukrainians that are losing, not the Russians.
You know, one of the things we try to do on this channel is cut through the propaganda. And literally this morning, I was listening to, and it was also published in the Financial Times. The Financial Times podcast specifically had on their Ukraine reporter, their foreign reporter, to specifically, and one of the things he specifically said was the evidence of those tanks that are on display in downtown Kiev right now, where they're having this parade, is evidence that Russia, it was poorly planned on Russia's part. They were caught flat-footed, and their leadership didn't know what they were doing. Those were the words that came out of the Financial Times' mouth.
Yeah, I'd like to see the Financial Times guy actually put on a uniform and go out and fight. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Anybody who's been involved in large-scale combat knows that both sides suffer casualties. It's not a consequence-free action on anybody's part. Ukraine had the largest army in Europe, the second largest army after Turkey, highly trained, well-equipped, trained to NATO standards, well-led. And the notion that 260,000 active duty forces backed up by another 400, 500,000 reservists trained weren't going to inflict losses on the Russians is just, it's absurd. Of course, Russia suffered losses. Of course, Russia suffered casualties. Of course, Russian units were forced to abandon equipment in the field. And of course, Ukraine managed to get control over some of this equipment. And that's what you're seeing right now. But that's not a sign of victory. That's a sign of just normal combat. Victory is determined not on what happened in the past, but what's happening right now. I dare these reporters to go to the front line. They won't, because they'll die. That's what's happening to Ukrainian soldiers right now. They're dying in massive numbers. Every time they try to accumulate enough armor to go forward and launch a counterattack, the Russians identify it, locate it, and destroy it. It's happening on a daily basis. The Ukrainians cannot launch counteroffensive because they don't have the resources to do it. Russia is dominating this battlefield on every aspect. So, it's one thing to sit there in Kiev and live your fantasy life. It's another thing to go forward and see what reality is. But you know what, Mr. Financial Times reporter, stay in Kiev and wait. Pretty soon, reality is going to come to you.
Well said. I'd be remiss, Scott, if we didn't. I want to get you out of here on this question, former weapons inspector. And one of the things that you've been focusing on is what's been happening at the nuclear power plant in Zaporozhye. And we now have evidence been turned over by the Russians to inspectors that there was shelling from the Ukrainian side. You've called what Ukraine has been doing against the nuclear power plant evidence of war crimes, and you've also talked about the American involvement in the attack on the nuclear power plant as it relates to the HIMARS system. So, can you give us an update on what's going on at the nuclear power plant and where you see things now?
Well, I mean, right now it appears that the Ukrainians are in in what I call the diplomatic endgame, and they're not going to win it. But they tried to create a crisis by shelling the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They were supported in this by the United States, both diplomatically and politically. Witness Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, raising the issue of the so-called the nuclear shield that Russia was using the power plant to hide behind with forces. He raised that on August 1st. August 5th, Ukraine begins the attacks, and the United States supports Ukraine's assertion that it's Russia shelling its own forces. Absurd. Even Zelensky couldn't sustain that lie. He finally had to admit that it was Ukraine attacking. But the Ukrainians' point is they had to attack because Russia was putting military forces in the plant. The United States backed this up, and no intelligence has been provided. I mean, remember during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we said Russia had missiles in Cuba. Russia said we didn't. We provided photographs that proved they did. KAL 007, we said the Russians shot it down. The Russians said, no, we didn't shoot it down. We brought the audio tape in, proved that they did. Now Blinken's saying Russia's putting heavy weapons in the nuclear power plant. Russia says, no, we're not. Where's the photograph, Blinken? It doesn't exist. It's pure propaganda. The idea is to create a political crisis of such magnitude that the international community comes together and insists on deploying an international peacekeeping force in Zaporizhia that would require Russia to give up the nuclear power plant, basically to allow the international community to accomplish that which the Ukrainian military can't do. But the Ukrainians have lost this. The inspectors now are on the ground. They're gaining access to the data that proves that Ukraine attacked. They'll also gain information about just the safety of the plant and the kind of operations that are taking place under what supervision. They're going to find out that the plant is competently managed, that the Russians are doing a very good job from an oversight perspective. As long as the Ukrainians don't shell the plant should function in total conformity with international safety standards and in conformity with whatever the safeguards agreements are in terms of protecting a nuclear material that's associated with the plant. Russia's doing everything right. It's Ukraine, again, that is not only being aggressive, but in a manner which violates international peace and security. If there was a Chernobyl-like event at Zaporizhia, it would impact all of Ukraine, Russia, Europe. It would be a global disaster. So anybody who is launching artillery strikes against Zaporizhia is committing a war crime of the most horrific nature, a crime against humanity. And any nation that greenlights this is likewise complicit in that crime. That's the United States of America. And then anybody who's involved in facilitating the targeting of American-provided weapons so that they can impact the nuclear power plant is likewise complicit in a war crime. And that goes for every one of you American soldiers that are involved in the targeting process. You may think you're just doing your job. Wake up, guys, pals. You just committed a war crime. And if there was any other government in the world besides the United States in a position to hold you accountable, you would be prosecuted as a war criminal. The fact that you're not going to be prosecuted doesn't mean that you haven't conducted something that's heinous in the eyes of the world. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Well, we want to thank you for that analysis. I had one sort of relevant thought. Do you know anything about those exoskeleton soldier suits that are like Iron Man? Because that was my idea for how you could actually climb Everest if you wanted to. Are those things real?
They are real. They are very real. And I don't know how they function at altitude and low temperatures, but hey, if that's what it takes to get
You
me
can
on
look
top,
into it.
Yeah.
Look into that.
Me
That's
too.
your homework. Okay.
Me too. Me too. I needed
they're
it.
my
my
climbing
age.
partner.
That's right. Scott Ritter has been our guest. Scott, where can people find you? I know you do amazing work on Telegram and your writing as well. Is that the best place to find you? Can you give
The
that?
best place is the Telegram channel, and I link everything I do to that channel. So it's a one-stop shop for anything related to me. I'm sure people are starting to overdose. I'm overdosing, but I will continue to do this as long as the situation finds my analysis to be valuable.
Well, our audience finds your analysis to be valuable, and we really appreciate it, making sense of everything that's going on right now in this craziness. So, Scott, thanks for joining us. Our guest, Scott Ritter, thanks once again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to all of you for subscribing. Again, we are closing in on 1 million subscribers here on the channel, so thanks to all of your support and